Welcome back. Well, we continue getting reactions to the news that came at us late this afternoon. Of course, that being the removal of Nobuhle Nkabane as the Higher Education Minister, being replaced by Buti Manamela. Keen to get your thoughts on it. 072-110-5584 to send us a WhatsApp. But let's hear from Nobuntu Hlazo-Webster now, who is, of course, with Build One South Africa. Nobuntu, a good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. Were you expecting to see that statement from the presidency?
We've certainly been calling for that statement from the presidency, and I think particularly even in the build-up of various budget debates, even in the budget debates on the presidency, we've been calling on the firing of Minister Nobuhle Nkabane. And there are numerous reasons for that. This is somebody who has misled Parliament. This is somebody who very clearly has overseen dubious appointments. But also, let's not forget, this is somebody who ignored whistleblowers on various other issues, warnings about SETA tender fraud and governance irregularities. And so this is something that needed to happen. This is something we certainly welcome, but we certainly are saying this can't be all. There has to be more. We can't let people get off the hook simply by being fired or by being dismissed. This is somebody who has, in the period as minister, really overseen, like I say, various dubious appointments, corruption, unethical behavior. And we can't allow people like that to continue to get away with it.
So you say this can't be all. What else would Bosa like to see?
So certainly we need to make sure that there is a parliamentary ethics committee review, and that must lead to something like a censure in the National Assembly. There has to be an independent forensic audit of actually her whole tenure in the department. How were the other appointments made? What else was going on in that department? Because it's very clear that this is somebody who has shown that they have an unethical character and can't be trusted. So certainly the lying to Parliament as a start is something that calls for the Parliamentary Ethics Committee to do a review. But we absolutely also have to see a forensic audit of her department.
Yeah. Then enter Buti Manamela, was Deputy Minister of the Department. And of course, you know, one of our guests talking to us about how he is a long-serving Deputy Minister in this department as well. So some optimism there?
Look, what is optimistic is the fact that he would have had context and background as to what has been happening in the department. This is not someone who's going to come in completely new. But part of the issue is that this is somebody who was vocal in their support of Nkabane during the earlier controversies. And so what you then ask yourself is, are we going to see the same pattern? There's proximity to the previous leadership, but there's also support for the behavior that was happening. Somebody who didn't call that out and somebody who fully supported that, was in full support of that, you can expect that you can have that kind of behavior. So we certainly have to keep an eye on what happens in that department. Even as now, what we'll call for is that there's a completely new process with the SETA board appointments, but also, like I say, some sort of forensic audit that needs to take place in that department. We have to keep an eye on Buti Manamela, given that he was supportive of Nkabane, even though, as you say, the good or the optimistic part of it is that he does have context and does have experience in the department.
Well, he's being deputized by Dr. Nomusa Dube. What do you make of that?
The problem with that is, why are we once again still having two deputy ministers? So as a party, we have long called for the review of deputy ministries to begin with. But secondly, now you have a second, once again, deputy minister. And really, to be honest, do we need a second deputy minister? What is the role of that second deputy minister? As somebody who's a parliamentarian, we often have deputy ministers who come into parliament, who can't account for certain things, who can't make various decisions. Their power is so limited that you have to ask yourself, what is the role of a second deputy minister, and why do we need to have a second deputy minister? Of course, there are also issues that relate to her previous appointments to a SETA board, although that we could say had to do with the previous minister and not necessarily her. But that is something also to reflect on in terms of her appointment.
Yeah. much of the criticism that we've heard this evening, particularly from our viewers, has been that the president took too long to act. And I wonder what you say to that. And one of the things that we'll explore also with the analysis that we'll get into with a political analyst in a few minutes is if this is a moment where the president gave in to pressure from the Democratic Alliance, in your view.
So the president certainly took too long to act, and this might have been an action that took place as political preservation, preserving the ANC's relationship with the DA. And certainly, whatever reason it is, we welcome that it happened. But it's unfortunate that when you look at it, you don't necessarily see what you can believe will be sustainable behavior from the president in terms of holding ministers to account and actually acting upon the behavior, a questionable behavior of ministers, because he took as long as he did to act. I mean, the most recent act by Minister Nkabane was not showing up in Parliament on Friday to account for these CETA board appointments, simply choosing to not show up. And the behavior that we've seen, and even the response to the previous issues that have been raised and that have surfaced by Minister Nkabane, showed that this is somebody who did not have a respect for the role. And that comes from the culture of the president that is quite enabling of this kind of behavior. And so absolutely, the president did take too long to act in this regard. There was plenty that has happened and plenty of evidence and just plenty of behavior that was on the surface that would warrant an immediate dismissal. And it took too long for the president to act. And like I say, it may have been for reasons of political preservation. And that's something that we ought to be concerned about when it comes to a president who's indecisive and not able to make decisions that are purely for the good of the nation.
All right. Nobuntu Hlazo-Webster there of Build One South Africa giving us her reaction. Thank you so much for your time. We do appreciate it.